My name is Elena Carter, and if you had met my family 10 years ago, you probably wouldn't have noticed anything unusual at first. We looked normal. A mother who kept the house in perfect condition. A son who everyone described as promising. And me, well, I was there. That was usually enough for people, because in my family, presence and importance were not the same thing. And I learned that difference very early. Some of my earliest memories are not dramatic. There were no screaming fights or obvious cruelty. Nothing that an outsider could easily point to and say, that's wrong. Instead, it was something quieter, more consistent, more precise. It was the way my mother would call Daniel into the room with warmth in her voice, and then call my name like it was an afterthought. Daniel, come here, sweetheart. Elena, you too. It was the way she remembered his favorite meals, his schedules, his preferences. And then asked me mid-dinner, you still don't like onions, right? Not because she cared, but because she never bothered to remember. Daniel was everything my mother valued. Confident, outgoing, loud in the way that fills a room. Even when he was wrong, he sounded right. And that mattered to her. I was the opposite. Quiet, observant, careful with my words. I didn't fight for attention. At first, it was because I didn't know how. Later, it was because I realized it didn't work. There's a specific moment I still remember with uncomfortable clarity. I must have been around 9 years old. We were in the living room, and I had just finished a drawing I was incredibly proud of. It had taken me hours. Tiny details, careful lines, colors I had mixed myself because I didn't have exactly what I needed. I walked up to my mother, holding it like it mattered. Mom, look what I made. She glanced at it. Just a glance. Then she smiled, but not at me. At Daniel. Daniel, didn't you say you wanted to try soccer this year? I think that would be wonderful for you. I stood there for a few seconds longer, still holding the paper, waiting for something, a comment, a question, anything, but it never came. Eventually, I lowered the drawing and walked away. That night, I threw it in the trash. Not because I stopped liking it, but because I understood something for the first time. Liking something doesn't make it valuable if no one else sees it. Daniel, on the other hand, didn't need to wonder if he was seen. Everything he did was noticed, celebrated, amplified. When he scored his first goal in a school match, my mother told the story for weeks, adding new details every time. When he forgot to turn in homework, she blamed the teacher. When he talked back, she called it strong personality. And slowly, over time, he started to believe something that would shape everything that came later. That he deserved more. I didn't resent him at first. That's the strange part. When you grow up in a system like that, you don't question it immediately. You adapt. You take the role that's given to you and try to make sense of it. Mine was simple. Be easy. Be quiet. Be fine. And for a while, I was. School became my escape. Not because I loved it in some passionate, dramatic way, but because it was predictable. Effort led to results. Results meant something. Teachers noticed. Grades mattered. It was a system that made sense. Unlike home. By the time I was 12, I had already stopped bringing things to my mother for approval. Not out of anger. Out of efficiency. Why invest emotion where there was no return? Instead, I started keeping things to myself. Achievements, ideas, plans, small wins that I learned to celebrate internally. It made me independent, but not in the way my mother later claimed. Not strong, not empowered, just self-contained. Daniel didn't like that. At first, he didn't notice. But as we got older, something shifted. He began to expect from me the same dynamic he had with our mother. Attention, agreement, support. And when he didn't get it, he started pushing. You think you're better than everyone now? He asked me once when I was about 14. We were in the kitchen. My mother wasn't home. I didn't say that, I replied. You don't have to. It's the way you act. I just don't talk as much as you. He laughed. Yeah, because you don't have anything interesting to say. I remember looking at him for a second. Not hurt, not angry. Just studying him, because for the first time, I saw something clearly. He didn't actually believe I had nothing to say. He needed me to believe it. That realization changed everything. Not outwardly. I didn't confront him. I didn't argue. But internally, I stopped accepting the roles they had assigned me. I started watching more carefully, listening more closely, understanding not just what they said, but why they said it. And that was the beginning of something they would never notice until it was too late. By the time I turned 18, leaving home wasn't a dramatic decision. It wasn't fueled by anger or rebellion. It was logical. There was nothing for me there. No space to grow. No recognition. No reason to stay. So I applied to colleges quietly, got accepted, made my plans. And when the time came, I packed my things without much discussion. My mother stood in the doorway the morning I left. "You'll be fine," she said. Not, "I'll miss you." Not, "I'm proud of you." Just that. "You'll be fine." I nodded. "I know." And for the first time, we were both right. Daniel didn't even come out to say goodbye. He texted me an hour later. "Good luck surviving on your own." I stared at the message for a moment. Then I replied, "I will." And I did. What none of them understood at the time was that being overlooked had given me something they didn't have. Not confidence, not support, but something far more dangerous. Freedom. Because when no one is watching you, no one sees what you're becoming. And by the time they finally did, it was already too late. If my mother built the rules of our house, my father was the exception that proved they existed. He wasn't loud. He wasn't confrontational. And he definitely wasn't the kind of man who would openly challenge my mother in front of others. But he noticed things. And when you grow up feeling invisible, being noticed, even quietly, feels like oxygen. I can't point to a single defining moment and say, "That's when everything changed between us." It was never like that with him. It was smaller, more subtle, like the way he would knock on my door before entering, even though no one else did. Or how he never interrupted me when I spoke, even when what I was saying wasn't particularly important. He treated my thoughts like they had weight, and that alone made me trust him. When I was around 15, I remember sitting at the kitchen table late at night, working on something that, at the time, felt incredibly important. It was a rough business idea. Nothing formal, just notes, numbers, sketches of how something could work. I didn't even fully understand it myself yet. I just knew I wanted to build something of my own one day. The house was quiet. Daniel was out. My mother was asleep. And then my father walked in. He didn't ask what I was doing immediately. He just made himself a cup of coffee, sat across from me, and watched for a moment. "You've been working on that for a while," he said. I hesitated. Years of being dismissed had trained me to minimize everything. "It's nothing," I replied. He nodded slowly. "If it was nothing, you wouldn't still be awake." That made me pause. Because he was right. He always was, in that quiet way that didn't feel like control, just understanding. "Can I see?" he asked. And for a second, I almost said no. Not because I didn't want to show him, but because I wasn't used to anyone asking. I turned the notebook toward him. He didn't rush. He didn't skim. He actually read it, page by page, as if it mattered. When he finished, he leaned back slightly and said something that stayed with me for years. "You think in systems." I frowned a little. "What does that mean?" "It means you don't just see what's in front of you," he said. "You see how things connect, how they move, how they grow." No one had ever described me like that before. Not even close. "I don't know if it's good," I admitted. He gave a small, almost amused smile. "It's very good," he said. "Most people never learn how to do that." That conversation didn't change my life overnight, but it changed how I saw myself. And sometimes, that's even more important. Over the next few years, that became our pattern. We didn't have long emotional talks. We didn't sit down and discuss feelings. But whenever I was working on something, an idea, a plan, a decision, he would show up quietly and engage with it. Not to control it. Not to reshape it. Just to understand it. And occasionally to guide it. Meanwhile, everything else in the house stayed the same. Daniel continued to be the center of attention. My mother continued to orbit around him like his success was her personal achievement. And I continued to exist somewhere just outside of that dynamic. But something inside me had started to shift. I wasn't trying to be seen anymore. Because I realized the only person whose recognition I actually valued already saw me. That realization made me calmer, more focused, less reactive. While Daniel chased attention, I started chasing stability. While he talked about what he would do, I started figuring out how things actually worked. Money, systems, risk, ownership, words that didn't mean much in our house, but would eventually mean everything. When I left for college, my father was the only one who seemed to understand what that actually meant. Not just physically leaving, but stepping out of a structure that had defined me my entire life. The night before I moved out, he knocked on my door. Just like always. "Do you have a minute?" he asked. I nodded. He stepped inside and looked around my room, as if memorizing it. "You're ready," he said. It wasn't a question. I swallowed slightly. "I think so." He reached into his jacket and handed me a small envelope. "Don't open it now," he said. "Just keep it." I took it carefully. "What is it?" "Something you might need later." That was all he said. No explanation. No emotional speech. Just trust. I didn't open that envelope for weeks. Not because I forgot, but because something about it felt intentional. Like it was meant for a specific moment. And I didn't want to rush it. College wasn't easy. Not in the way people like to dramatize, with wild struggles and constant crisis, but in a quieter, more consistent way. Everything depended on me. Every decision. Every mistake. Every consequence. There was no safety net. No one to call if things went wrong. And strangely, that made me stronger faster than anything else could have. I worked while studying. Saved whenever I could. Learned things that weren't in textbooks. How people negotiate, how deals are structured, how value is actually created. I made mistakes. Some expensive. Some embarrassing. But each one taught me something I could use. And slowly, very slowly, things started to come together. During my second year, I finally opened the envelope my father had given me. Inside there was a simple note. And a document. The note was short, written in his handwriting. "You won't need this yet. But one day you'll understand why it matters." The document was related to the house. At the time, I didn't fully grasp it. It looked like a partial ownership structure. Something legal, something strategic. But I didn't have the full context. Not yet. So I did what I always did when I didn't fully understand something. I kept it. I studied it. And I waited. Years passed. I graduated. Built a career. Started getting involved in property management and small investments. Nothing massive, but enough to learn the game from the inside. And every once in a while, I thought about that document. About what my father had started. Because deep down I knew something. He hadn't given it to me randomly. There was a plan. I just didn't see it yet. The last time I saw him before he got sick, we had coffee together. Just the two of us. He looked at me differently that day. Not like I was still figuring things out, but like he already knew I had. "You're doing well," he said. I nodded. "I'm trying." He shook his head slightly. "No," he said. "You're building." That word again. Precise. Intentional. "You don't wait for things to happen," he continued. "You position yourself so they have to." I smiled faintly. "That sounds a little intense." "It is," he replied calmly. "But it's also how the world actually works." There was a pause. And then he added something that, at the time, felt almost casual, but later became one of the most important things he ever said to me. "Ownership is everything, Elena." I looked at him. "What do you mean?" He met my eyes directly. "If you don't own it, you don't control it." At the time, I thought he was talking about business, about work, about money, and in a way he was. But not just that. Looking back now, that wasn't advice. That was a warning. Because by the time everything happened, by the time the will was read, by the time my mother smiled and handed everything to Daniel, the truth was already in motion, already decided, already secured. They just didn't know it yet. The first time my father forgot something important, no one reacted the way they should have. Not immediately. It was something small. So small that if you didn't know him, you might have missed it. We were having dinner. One of those rare occasions when all of us were in the same room without distractions. My mother was talking about Daniel, of course. Something about a new opportunity, a business idea he was exploring. Daniel was nodding confidently, adding details that sounded impressive if you didn't look too closely. And my father just sat there quietly. That wasn't unusual. But then my mother turned to him and asked, "Didn't you say the same thing about your colleague last week?" And he paused. Not the kind of pause where someone is thinking, the kind where something isn't there. "I don't remember," he said. At the time, no one said anything. My mother brushed it off. Daniel kept talking. And I watched. Because something about that moment didn't feel right. My father didn't forget things. He missed details sometimes, avoided conflict often, but he didn't forget. Not like that. Over the next few weeks, it happened again. And again. Small things at first. Names. Dates. Conversations we had just days before. Each time, my mother found a way to minimize it. "He's tired. He's been working too much. It's normal at his age." Normal. That word again. The same one she used to explain everything she didn't want to deal with. I started visiting more often. Not because anyone asked me to, but because I knew something was wrong. And unlike the rest of them, I didn't ignore things just because they were inconvenient. One afternoon, I found him in the living room, sitting in his usual chair, staring at nothing in particular. The TV was on, but he wasn't watching it. "Hey," I said softly. He turned his head slowly. And for a second, just a second, there was confusion in his eyes. Like he was trying to place me. Then it clicked. "Elena," he said and smiled faintly. But that second stayed with me. "Have you seen a doctor?" I asked, sitting across from him. He hesitated. Your answer should have been immediate. Clear. Confident. His wasn't. "Not yet," he said. "Why not?" He looked down at his hands. I didn't want to make it real. That was the moment I knew. Not suspected. Knew. The diagnosis came 2 weeks later. And suddenly, everything moved faster. Appointments. Tests. Specialists. Words that had never been part of our daily life became routine. And through all of it, the differences between us became sharper than ever. Daniel showed up when it was convenient. He asked questions, but not the ones that mattered. How serious is it? What are the options? How long is the recovery? He treated it like a problem to solve quickly. Something that needed a clean, simple outcome. My mother focused on control. Schedules. Appearances. Who knew and who didn't. She didn't cry. Not in front of us. Instead, she managed everything like it was a situation that needed to be handled properly. Efficiently. Respectably. And me? I stayed. Hospitals have a way of stripping everything down to what's real. There's no performance there. No roles. No illusions. Just time, and how you choose to spend it. I spent mine with him. I learned the rhythm of his treatment. The subtle signs of when he was in pain but didn't want to say it. The way his voice changed when he was tired. The way he would look at me sometimes, like he was trying to say something without saying it out loud. We didn't talk about death. Not directly. That wasn't who he was. But we talked about everything around it. One night, we were alone in his hospital room. The lights were dim. Machines hummed quietly in the background. He looked weaker than I had ever seen him. But his eyes were still clear. "You've been busy," he said. I smiled faintly. "I always am. With work. With everything." He studied me for a moment. "You're not just working," he said. "You're positioning." That word again. Positioning. "You always say that," I replied. "Because it matters," he said. There was a pause. Then he asked something unexpected. "Do you still have the document I gave you?" My chest tightened slightly. "Yes." "Have you looked at it?" "I have. And I don't fully understand it." He nodded slowly. "That's good." I frowned a little. "Good. If you understood it too early, he said, you might have used it wrong. That wasn't reassuring. What is it exactly? I asked. He looked at me carefully, not like he was deciding if he should tell me. But how much? It's protection, he said finally. From what? He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he asked, do you trust your mother? The question caught me off guard. Not because I didn't know the answer, but because he had never asked it so directly. I chose my words carefully. I understand her, I said. He gave a small, almost sad smile. That's not the same thing. No, I admitted. It's not. And your brother? I exhaled quietly. I don't rely on him. That's wise, he said. There was a long silence after that. The kind that feels heavy, but not uncomfortable. Then he said something that shifted everything. I needed to make sure you would be okay. I am okay, I replied. He shook his head slightly. I know that, he said. That's exactly why I did it. I felt a chill run through me. Did what? He looked at me, really looked at me. Elena, when the time comes. He paused. And for the first time, I saw uncertainty in him. Not fear, not regret, just the weight of knowing something that couldn't be undone. They're going to make decisions, he said carefully. Decisions that feel right to them. I didn't say anything, because I already understood what he meant. And you? I asked quietly. What about me? What do you want? He held my gaze for a long moment. Then he said something that didn't make sense at the time, but would later become everything. I already made my decision. A few days before he passed, he was more awake than usual, clear, present, almost like himself again. I sat next to him, holding his hand. Elena, he said softly, I'm here. You always are. I swallowed. You don't have to worry about me, I said. He looked at me, and for the first time, there was something close to urgency in his expression. I'm not worried about you surviving, he said. I'm making sure you're not overlooked. That hit harder than anything else. Because he saw it. All of it. Everything I had never said out loud. You won't need to fight them, he continued. I frowned slightly. What do you mean? He squeezed my hand weakly. Just wait. Those were the last real words he ever said to me. He passed 3 days later. Quietly. Without drama. Without a scene. And just like that, everything we had left unsaid became something I had to figure out on my own. At the funeral, people talked about him like they understood him, like they knew who he was. They didn't. Not really. My mother stood strong, composed, receiving condolences like she was hosting an event. Daniel spoke about legacy, about continuing what my father had built, about honoring his vision. I listened. And for the first time, I didn't feel invisible. I felt something else. Something sharper. Something clearer. I felt prepared. Because deep down, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. My father hadn't left things unfinished. He had already moved the pieces. They just hadn't realized it yet. The day of the will reading felt strangely normal. That was the first thing that didn't sit right with me. There should have been tension, uncertainty, something heavier in the air. But there wasn't. Instead, everything felt arranged, controlled, almost like the outcome had already been accepted before the words were even spoken. We were all in the living room, the same one where we had spent years pretending to be a functional family. Same furniture, same walls, same unspoken hierarchy. Only one thing was missing: my father. And somehow, his absence made everything clearer. The lawyer sat across from us, his briefcase open, documents neatly organized. My mother sat upright, composed as always. Not grieving, performing. Daniel leaned back slightly, one arm resting casually over the back of the couch, like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Comfortable, confident, certain. I sat in the same place I always had. Quiet, observing. But this time, something was different. I wasn't waiting for recognition anymore. I was waiting for confirmation. The lawyer cleared his throat. And just like that, it began. Most of it was expected. Financial allocations, minor assets, formal language that sounded important, but carried little emotional weight. My mother nodded occasionally. Daniel barely paid attention. Until the family property. That got his attention. Of course it did. Will be transferred in full to Daniel Carter. There it was. Clean. Direct. Final. No hesitation. No condition. No mention of me. Silence filled the room for a moment. But it wasn't shock. It was acknowledgement. Like everyone had just heard what they already believed to be true. My mother smiled. Not widely. Not dramatically. Just enough. The kind of smile that said, "This is how it should be." Daniel exhaled, almost like he had been holding his breath. Then leaned forward slightly. "Okay," he said, trying to sound casual, but failing to hide the satisfaction in his voice. "Good. Good." That word echoed in my head for a second. And then, they both looked at me. Not with guilt. Not with hesitation. But with something worse. Expectation. They expected me to accept it. To nod. To play my role. To be exactly who I had always been. My mother spoke first. "Elena," she said softly, her tone carefully measured. "You understand, right?" I looked at her. Really looked at her. At the calm expression. The controlled posture. The complete absence of doubt. And in that moment, something inside me became very, very still. Because I finally saw it clearly. Not just the favoritism. Not just the pattern. But the certainty behind it. She didn't think she was being unfair. She thought she was being logical. "You've always been more independent," she continued. There it was again. That word. The justification. The excuse. The shield. Daniel didn't say anything. He didn't need to. His expression said enough. Relief. Validation. Ownership. And for a brief second, a very brief second, a version of me that no longer existed considered speaking up. Correcting them. Breaking the illusion right there. But I didn't. Because something my father said came back to me. Clear. Precise. Unshakable. "You won't need to fight them, just wait." So I did. I nodded. And that was the moment everything truly changed. The lawyer continued speaking. But I barely heard the words. Because something else was happening. Something more subtle. More personal. My mother relaxed. Physically. Like a decision had been finalized. Like a responsibility had been completed. Daniel started asking questions. Practical ones. Immediate ones. What about taxes? How soon can I make changes? Are there any restrictions? Not a single question about legacy. About meaning. About memory. To him, the house was already just an asset. At one point, he even glanced around the room and said, "I might open up this space. It's a little outdated." That space was where my father used to sit every morning. I felt it then. Not anger. Not yet. Something colder. Clarity. That night, they suggested we have dinner together. To keep things normal. That's what my mother said. Normal. We sat at the table like we had done 1,000 times before. Same plates. Same positions. Same roles. Except this time, they didn't even pretend. Daniel talked about the house like it was already his project. "I'm thinking of redoing the kitchen first." My mother nodded approvingly. "That's a good idea. It always needed an update." I looked at them and realized something that should have been obvious much earlier. They had already erased my father from the house. Not emotionally. Practically. He was gone. And now, so was any trace of what he had built. Then Daniel said something that crossed a line he didn't even realize existed. "Well," he added casually, "it makes sense. I'm the one who's actually going to do something with it." Silence. That sentence hung in the air. Heavy. Ugly. Final. My mother didn't correct him. Didn't react. Didn't even hesitate. Instead, she looked at me and said, "He's right, Elena." That was the moment. Not the will. Not the house. Not the inheritance. That sentence. That was the moment I stopped seeing them as family and started seeing them clearly. Because in that instant, everything aligned. My father's words. The document. The silence. The timing. It all made sense. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't neglect. This wasn't even favoritism anymore. This was a decision. And for the first time in my life, I made one too. Not out loud. Not dramatically. Not emotionally. Quietly. I finished dinner, helped clear the table, said goodnight, and walked out of that house, knowing something they didn't. Because while they were celebrating what they thought they had gained, I was thinking about something else entirely. Timing. Because the truth is, there's a difference between being right and revealing you're right. And if you do it too early, you lose the impact. So I waited. Not days. Not weeks. Months. I let Daniel move forward with his plans. Watched him invest money. Watched him make changes. Watched my mother talk about the house like it was secured. And I said nothing. Because the moment I was waiting for had to be perfect. It had to hurt. Not in a cruel way. Not in a loud way. But in a way they would never forget. Because this was never about taking something from them. It was about showing them. They never had it to begin with. And when that moment finally came, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I didn't fight. I just told the truth. And that was enough. The call came on a Tuesday morning. I remember that detail clearly because nothing about that day felt important. Until it was. I was at my apartment, sitting at my desk, going through emails, halfway between focused and distracted, when my phone rang. Unknown number. Normally, I would have ignored it. But something made me answer. Elena Carter? The voice asked. Yes. This is Mr. Whitmore, your father's attorney. For a second, everything in me sharpened. Not emotionally. Instinctively. Yes, I said, sitting up slightly. Is everything okay? There was a pause. Not long, but deliberate. There's something we need to discuss. In person, preferably. That was enough. Because people like him don't call for small things. They don't prefer meetings unless something matters. When? I asked. As soon as possible. I agreed. And the moment the call ended, I already knew. This was it. His office was exactly how I expected it to be. Organized. Quiet. Precise. Everything in its place. Nothing unnecessary. He didn't waste time with small talk. Didn't ask how I was. Didn't offer condolences. He simply opened a folder and looked at me. Elena, he said, what I'm about to show you was arranged by your father over several years. My chest tightened slightly. Not with fear. With recognition. He was very specific about timing, he continued. And very clear about intention. That word again. Intention. He turned the first document toward me. I leaned forward. And as I started reading, something inside me went completely still. Because I recognized it. It was the same structure I had seen years ago. In the envelope my father gave me. Only now. It was complete. This doesn't make sense, I said quietly. Mr. Whitmore didn't react. It does, he replied calmly. You just didn't have all the pieces before. I kept reading, page after page, clause after clause, and with every line, the truth became clearer. My father hadn't left the house to Daniel. He couldn't, because legally, it was no longer his to give. He had transferred ownership, gradually, strategically, quietly, to me, not all at once, not in a way that would raise questions, but in stages, years in advance. Each transfer structured to avoid conflict, to prevent interference, to make sure that by the time anyone noticed, it was already irreversible. I looked up. So the will, I said slowly, was never meant to reflect reality, Mr. Whitmore finished. Silence. I leaned back slightly, processing. They think the house is his, I said. Yes. They think it was transferred to him. Yes. I nodded once. And it wasn't. Mr. Whitmore met my gaze. No, Elena. He paused. It was transferred to you. There's more, he added. Of course there was. There's always more when something is done this carefully. He slid another document forward. This confirms full ownership, he said. As of last month. Last month. Right before my father passed. Right before the will was read. Right before my mother smiled. and handed something away that no longer belonged to her. I let out a slow breath, and for the first time since the funeral, I felt something close to emotion. Not anger, not sadness, respect, because now I understood. He hadn't tried to fight them. He had outplayed them. There was one condition, Mr. Whitmore said. I looked up. Your father requested that this information not be disclosed until the transfer was fully finalized. It is now, I said. Yes. And before that? You were legally protected, he said. But revealing it too early could have created complications. I nodded slowly. Of course it would have. Because my mother would have fought it. Daniel would have challenged it. They would have turned it into a conflict. And conflict creates risk. My father didn't leave things to chance. He removed it. I sat there in silence for a moment. Then I asked the only question that actually mattered. Why didn't he just say it? Mr. Whitmore didn't hesitate. Because, he said, he knew how your family would react. That answer landed harder than anything else. Because it wasn't legal. It wasn't strategic. It was personal. He knew. He knew exactly what they would do. What they would assume. How they would act. And instead of trying to change them, he planned around them. When I left that office, I wasn't overwhelmed. I wasn't emotional. I was focused. Because now, this wasn't just about what had happened. It was about what I was going to do next. Most people would have confronted them immediately, walked back into the house, thrown the documents on the table, demanded explanations. That would have been satisfying in the moment, but it would have been a mistake, because the truth, revealed too early, loses its power. And I wasn't interested in a reaction. I was interested in a result. So I did something they would never expect. Nothing. I said nothing. I let Daniel continue. I let him invest in renovations. Let him make plans. Let him believe the house was his. I let my mother talk about it to relatives. Boast about it. Frame it as proof that everything in our family was in order. And every time I saw it, every time I heard it, I remembered something my father told me. You don't wait for things to happen. You position yourself so they have to. That's exactly what I was doing. Positioning. Because when the moment came, it wouldn't be an argument. It wouldn't be a discussion. It would be final. 3 months. That's how long I waited. 3 months of watching, tracking, understanding. Daniel wasn't just planning to live in the house. He was planning to sell it. That changed everything. Because living in an illusion is one thing. Trying to profit from it, that's where reality hits hard. And the moment I saw the listing draft, the moment I realized he was about to sign papers that would expose everything, I knew the time to wait was over. Because in just a few days, they weren't just going to lose an argument, they were going to lose everything they thought they owned. By the 3rd month, Daniel had stopped pretending. At first, he spoke about the house like it was a future project. Then it became a plan. And finally, it became a transaction. He wasn't just living there anymore. He was preparing to sell it. I found out the same way I found out most things in that family. Not because they told me, but because they assumed I didn't matter enough to keep it from me. It was my mother who mentioned it casually during a phone call. Oh, Daniel's been busy with the house, she said. He might put it on the market soon. It's a good time to sell. A good time to sell. I closed my eyes for a second. Not out of frustration. Out of clarity. Because that was it. That was the moment everything aligned. Living in a lie is one thing. But trying to formalize it? Trying to turn it into a legal transaction? That's when the truth stops being optional. I didn't rush. I didn't react. Instead, I asked a simple question. When is he meeting with the agent? My mother didn't hesitate. Next week, she said. Why? I let a small pause sit between us. No reason, I replied calmly. Just curious. She didn't question it. She never did. Because in her mind, I was still predictable. Still passive. Still fine. The meeting was scheduled for a Thursday afternoon. I arrived 10 minutes early. Not inside the house. Outside. I sat in my car for a moment looking at it. The same house. Same walls. same windows. But it didn't feel the same anymore. Because for the first time, I wasn't coming back as a daughter. I was arriving as the owner. That thought didn't make me smile. It didn't make me feel powerful. It just made everything clear. I stepped out of the car, walked to the door, and let myself in. Voices. Daniel. Confident. Animated. And based on the upgrades, I think we can list higher, he was saying. Another voice. Professional. Measured. The agent. I agree, the agent replied. The market is strong right now. If everything is in order, we could move quickly. If everything is in order. I stepped into the living room. They all turned. Daniel looked surprised, then slightly annoyed. Oh, he said. Didn't know you were coming. I didn't know I needed permission, I replied. The agent looked between us, sensing something off. My mother forced a small smile. Elena, she said, we're in the middle of something. I know, I answered calmly. I'll be quick. There's a specific kind of silence that happens right before everything changes. Not loud, not dramatic, tight. That's what filled the room. Daniel crossed his arms slightly. What is this about? I walked toward the table, slowly, not to intimidate, not to perform, just deliberately. I placed a folder down. I think, I said evenly, there's something you should all see before this goes any further. The agent straightened slightly. Daniel frowned. What are you talking about? He asked. Just read it, I said. He didn't want to. That was obvious. But curiosity, and something else, something closer to unease, made him reach for the documents anyway. My mother leaned in. The agent stayed silent. And then, they started reading. At first, nothing happened. Just scanning, processing. Then, a pause. A real one. Daniel's brow tightened. This doesn't make sense, he said. I didn't respond. He flipped the page. Read faster. Then slower. What is this? He asked, his voice sharper now. Keep reading, I said. My mother took the papers from his hands. Her expression changed more slowly. Confusion first. Then resistance. Then something else. Something she couldn't hide. Fear. The room went completely still. The agent shifted slightly. I'm sorry, he said carefully. But is there an issue with the ownership? That was the moment. The exact moment everything collapsed. Because the question wasn't emotional. It wasn't personal. It was legal. And legal truth doesn't bend. Yes, I said calmly. There was a pause. Then I added, there is. All eyes turned to me. Daniel stared. My mother didn't speak. The issue, I continued, is that he doesn't own the house. Silence. Not disbelief. Not denial. Shock. Because deep down, they already knew. They just didn't want to accept it. That's not possible, Daniel said immediately. It is, I replied. My voice didn't rise. Didn't shake. It didn't need to. The ownership was transferred, I continued. Gradually. Legally. Years ago. To who? The agent asked quietly. I held his gaze. Me. It hit all at once. Daniel stepped back slightly. My mother sat down. Actually sat down. Like her body couldn't hold the weight of what she was hearing. No, she said softly. No, this isn't right. I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I just let the documents speak. Because they already were. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, pacing now. This is some kind of mistake, he said. There has to be. There isn't, I cut in. That was the first time I interrupted him in my entire life. And it landed. Hard. You should probably verify everything, I said, looking at the agent. He nodded immediately. Yes, I will. Because now, this wasn't a family situation. It was a liability. And no professional touches that without certainty. Daniel turned to me. Anger now. Real anger. You knew, he demanded. I held his gaze. Yes. How long? I paused. Just slightly. Long enough. That answer did more damage than anything else I could have said. Because it meant one thing. I let it happen. And as the reality settled in, as the weight of their assumptions finally collapsed under the truth, I realized something. This wasn't the end. Not yet. Because losing the house? That was just the beginning. For a few seconds after the truth came out, no one moved. Not Daniel. Not my mother. Not even the agent. It was like the entire room had been disconnected from reality and was slowly trying to reconnect. The documents were still on the table, open, undeniable, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't the one trying to explain myself. I was the one being understood. Daniel reacted first. Of course he did. He always did. "This is ridiculous," he said, his voice sharp, unstable. "There's no way this is legal. There's no way he could just." "He didn't just do anything," I said calmly. He stopped, because my tone didn't match his. And that made it worse. "This was done over years," I continued. "Carefully, legally, intentionally." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "So what?" he snapped. "You just waited? You knew and you let me?" Yes. That one word landed harder than anything else, because it confirmed everything he didn't want to believe. He wasn't just wrong. He had been wrong for months. Publicly. Confidently. And I had let him be. My mother finally spoke. "Elena," she said, her voice softer now, uncertain in a way I had never heard before. "Why didn't you say anything?" I looked at her. Really looked at her. And for the first time, I didn't see authority. I didn't see control. I saw someone who had lost it. "You didn't ask," I said. Silence. Because that was the truth. She never asked what I thought. Never asked what I knew. Never asked what I had. She assumed. And now, that assumption had a cost. The agent cleared his throat, visibly uncomfortable. "I think it would be best if we pause this process," he said carefully, "until ownership is fully verified." Verified, Daniel repeated, but his voice had changed. It wasn't confident anymore. It was defensive, because deep down, he already knew. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a mistake. His mistake. After the agent left, everything changed. The room felt smaller, heavier, more honest. My mother stood up slowly. "Elena," she said again, this time with something new in her tone. Not authority. Appeal. "You should have told us," she said. I tilted my head slightly. "Why?" I asked. That question caught her off guard. Because we're family," she said. Family. That word. For a moment, I almost smiled. But not out of amusement. Out of clarity. "Were we?" I asked quietly. That landed. Because now we weren't talking about the house anymore. We were talking about everything. "You're overreacting," she said quickly. "This isn't about that." "It is," I replied. "No, it's not," she insisted. "This is just a misunderstanding. We can fix this." Fix it. Like it was a mistake. Like it was something accidental. "It's already fixed," I said. Her expression tightened. "Elena," she said, her voice sharper now. "Your brother has already invested money into this house." There it was. Not our home. Not your father's memory. Money. I nodded slowly. "I know," I said. "Then you understand why this is unfair," she continued. And that's when it happened. That final shift. The one my father had been preparing me for all along. "No," I said calmly. "I don't." Silence. Because that was the moment she realized something she had never considered before. I wasn't playing my role anymore. "I didn't decide this," I continued. "He did." I didn't need to say my father's name. It was already there. In the room. In the silence. In the documents. "And you accepted it," she said. "Yes." "And you're just going to take everything?" I held her gaze. "No," I said. "I'm keeping what's mine." Daniel let out a frustrated breath, pacing again. "This is insane," he muttered. "This is actually insane." Then he stopped. Looked at me. "You think you won?" he said. I didn't answer. Because this wasn't about winning. And that's exactly what he didn't understand. "You didn't lose the house," I said quietly. They both looked at me. "You lost something else," I continued. My mother frowned slightly. "What are you talking about?" I took a breath. Not because I needed it, but because the moment deserved it. You lost me, I said. Silence. Real silence. Because that wasn't legal. That wasn't financial. That was final. I didn't argue after that. Didn't stay. Didn't wait for a response. Because there wasn't one that mattered. I picked up the documents, turned, and walked toward the door. Elena, my mother called. I stopped. But I didn't turn around. Is this really how you want this to end? She asked. I thought about that question for a moment. Not emotionally. Clearly. Then I answered. This isn't how it ends. A pause. It's how it finally becomes honest. And then I left. That day, they lost control. Of the house. Of the narrative. Of me. But what they didn't understand yet was that consequences don't end in a moment. They unfold. Slowly. And in ways you don't expect. After I walked out that day, I didn't go back. Not immediately. Not out of anger. Not out of fear. But because something had already ended. And going back too soon would have meant pretending it hadn't. The first few days were quiet. Not peaceful. Not tense. Just quiet. No calls. No messages. Which in a strange way told me everything I needed to know. They weren't reaching out because they cared. They were trying to figure out what to do. How to fix it. How to reverse it. How to regain control. Because for the first time, they couldn't ignore reality. It came 4 days later. My mother. I let it ring twice before answering. Elena, she said immediately, her voice controlled again, but not as steady as before. We need to talk. We. Not I miss you. Not how are you. We need to talk. I almost didn't respond. But I did. About what? I asked. A pause. Then. This situation. Of course. I leaned back slightly. There's nothing to discuss, I said calmly. Yes, there is, she insisted. This isn't how things were supposed to happen. There it was again. Supposed to. As if reality had made a mistake. As far as I can tell, I replied. This is exactly how things were set up to happen. Silence. Then her tone shifted. Subtle. But familiar. Elena, your brother is in a difficult position right now. And there it was. Not responsibility. Not reflection. Redirection. He's already spent money on the house, she continued. He made plans based on what your father said. I closed my eyes for a second. Not out of frustration. Out of recognition. Because nothing had changed. They weren't processing what happened. They were trying to reframe it. To make it my responsibility. I didn't ask him to do that, I said. No, but you let him, she replied quickly. That one almost made me laugh. Almost. Because the logic was so predictable. You made decisions without knowing the full situation, I said calmly. That's not something I can fix for you. You're being cold, she said. There it was. The shift from logic to emotion. The attempt to pull me back into a role I had already left. Am I? I asked. Yes, she said firmly. This isn't how family treats each other. I let that sit. Because now, we were finally talking about the right thing. Then what is? I asked. She didn't answer immediately. And in that silence, I realized something important. She didn't have an answer. Because for her, family had never been about fairness. It had been about structure, roles, expectations, hierarchy, and I had just stepped out of all of it. You made your choices, I said quietly. Years of them. That's not fair, she said. It is, I replied. It's just not comfortable. Silence. He was your brother, she said finally. He deserved something. I nodded slowly. And I didn't. That question landed harder than anything else. Because there was no way to answer it without admitting the truth. And she knew it. We're not going to agree on this, she said. No, I replied. We're not. Another pause. Then she asked softer this time. What happens now? That was the question that actually mattered. And for the first time, I answered it honestly. You move on, I said. And you, she asked. I looked around my apartment. Quiet. Ordered. Mine. I already did. And then I hung up. Daniel tried to fight it. Of course he did. Lawyers, calls, arguments that went nowhere. But the outcome never changed. Because it couldn't. The structure my father had built was solid, not emotional, not debatable, final. Eventually, he stopped. Not because he accepted it, but because he had no choice. I didn't sell it. That surprised people. It probably surprised you too. But the truth is, it was never about the money. I renovated it. Carefully. Not to erase what it was, but to preserve what mattered. I kept my father's space exactly the same. The chair. The photos. The quiet presence he left behind. Because that was the only part of it that had ever truly been mine. People think revenge is loud, dramatic, explosive. It's not. Real revenge, the kind that actually changes something, is quiet. It's walking away without needing validation. It's holding your ground without raising your voice. It's letting people face the consequences of decisions they made with complete confidence. They always said I needed less, that I was independent, that I would be fine. And they were right, just not in the way they meant. Because in the end, I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their support. And I definitely didn't need their version of family. They thought they gave everything to my brother. But the truth is, they gave me something far more valuable. The freedom to build a life where I was never overlooked again.